The water glistened with muted reflections as dusk wrapped Venice in its silken shroud. I leaned over the ancient stone balcony of our rented villa, watching the canals twist into shadows. Far below, the murmur of gondoliers mingled with the faint clinking of glasses from a distant restaurant, blending into the city's eternal lullaby. It felt almost cinematic, this setting, as if I'd slipped into someone else's story. Daniel, my husband, had insisted on Venice, a grand idea to pull our family together, he'd said, a bonding experience. But I could sense the irony even before we arrived. Venice was a city of mysteries and veiled secrets, not exactly the sort of place to stitch a family into a single happy unit. Perhaps that was why I felt restless, my gaze drawn too often to the young man with stormy eyes who lingered near the corners of rooms, watching with a smirk that suggested he saw through everything. Philip, my stepson, carried himself like he owned his secrets, wearing them like a second skin. He was more elusive than I remembered, as if the years apart had only deepened the distance between us. Yet his rare glances my way held an intensity that felt oddly personal, almost like an accusation, though I couldn't place why. It was in Venice, in the hazy glow of twilight and under the mask of normalcy, that I first noticed the fissures, those invisible cracks running beneath us, growing sharper and more obvious with each passing day. I should have known better than to follow him that night, should have resisted the pull of my curiosity. But something about the way he slipped from the room, quietly, as if hoping not to be noticed, stirred a part of me I hadn't felt in years. I could tell myself it was worry, the desire to keep peace between him and his father. But it was more complicated than that. I sensed there was a shadow between us, something unsaid, something that begged to be explored. Down the alleyways I followed, watching him weave through the crowds with a practiced ease that only stirred my curiosity further. And then he disappeared into a narrow passage where the only light came from a single street lamp casting an orange hue. I hung back, trying to look casual, blending in with the tourists strolling past. It was then that I saw it. The exchange, subtle but unmistakable. Philip was meeting someone, a tall figure shrouded in black, who handed him something before disappearing into the shadows. My heart raced. What was he hiding? And why had he come all the way to Venice to keep his secrets? In the days that followed, my suspicions grew. Yet I couldn't help the magnetic pull I felt each time he was near. Philip had that rare quality of making me question everything I thought I understood, about him, about Daniel, and perhaps most unsettlingly, about myself. And Venice, with its endless corners and hidden alleys, only deepened the sense of being trapped in a web of secrecy, one I was both fearful and desperate to unravel. It was a choice I'd made that night to follow him, but it was a choice that would lead to far darker revelations than I ever could have anticipated. Looking back, it's strange to think about how naturally I took on the role of Elaine Marcotte, the sophisticated second wife of a tech mogul. I was the poised woman by Daniel's side, the one who organized charity galas, arranged dinner parties, and made the small talk he never cared for. I'd spent years curating a life that, by all appearances, seemed flawless. And for the most part it was. But Daniel was a complex man. His career had always come first, pulling him from one city to another in pursuit of the next big innovation, leaving me with the time and resources to mold our home into an elegant, if empty, sanctuary. Our marriage was the sort that existed in public gestures, in shared photos at events, and in the subtle, respectable silence of routine. I told myself this was what I wanted, that I could live with Daniel's distance, with the knowledge that he gave more to his work than he'd ever given to me. After all, we both understood our roles. And then there was Philip, Daniel's son from his first marriage. Philip had been a fixture in my life since he was a teenager, though we'd had little more than cordial interactions in those years. While I organized his father's life, he went about building his own. a life that seemed to exist on the fringes, cloaked in mystery. It was hard to get close to him. He was always the quiet, rebellious one, drifting in and out of our lives with a cold, almost calculating detachment. As a journalist, he'd taken on the sort of dangerous assignments that seemed crafted to keep him as far from his father as possible. Conflict zones, stories of political corruption, dark investigations that led him to places where others wouldn't go. It suited him somehow. Philip had an intensity that came with understanding things most people avoided, and it showed in the way he interacted with the world around him. Carefully, almost cautiously, like someone accustomed to secrets. The invitation to Venice had been Daniel's idea. He thought it would be a chance to reconnect, as he put it. A word that felt hollow even as he said it. But he was sincere in his way. Daniel liked the idea of family, even if he didn't fully understand what it meant. And so we went along with it, and Venice became the backdrop for our uneasy reunion. From the start, Philip's demeanor was more guarded than ever, his presence unsettling in ways I couldn't quite articulate. There was a quiet rebellion in his eyes when he looked at his father, a tension simmering just below the surface. I told myself it was only natural. Families are complicated after all. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than that. One evening, as we sat by the balcony with glasses of wine, I caught Philip's gaze resting on me for just a moment too long. It was subtle, but unmistakable, that lingering look that made my pulse quicken for reasons I couldn't fully explain. In the soft glow of Venetian lights, I felt oddly vulnerable, as though he saw past the polite mask I wore. It left me wondering how much he really understood. About me, about his father, perhaps even about the life I'd crafted so carefully. Daniel, ever distracted by his phone and emails, barely noticed the tension that hung in the air. He had a talent for missing things that mattered, like the way Philip's eyes narrowed whenever he spoke about their shared past, or the bitterness that crept into his tone during strained conversations. If Daniel sensed the resentment his son harbored, he chose to ignore it, likely out of convenience. He was a man who thrived on pragmatism, after all. And in that pragmatism I found the seeds of my own loneliness. It was one afternoon that week, when Daniel left for a quick business meeting, that I found myself alone with Philip in the villa's airy salon. I'd been flipping through an old travel guide, trying to decide on an itinerary, when Philip appeared at the doorway, his gaze as sharp as ever. "Venice is a maze," he said, a smirk playing at his lips. "Easy to get lost if you're not careful." I looked up, startled by his presence, though I tried to mask my surprise. "Well, that's part of the charm, isn't it?" I replied lightly, though his words had stirred something in me. An image of myself wandering through narrow alleys, seeking something I couldn't quite define. Philip stepped further into the room, taking a seat across from me. "Do you ever feel like you're searching for something? That's what I love about this city. It doesn't give up its secrets easily." His gaze held mine, and for a brief, unsettling moment I felt exposed, as if he saw the things I tried to hide. The quiet dissatisfaction, the restlessness. He leaned back, eyes gleaming with something I couldn't place, and suddenly the room felt too small, the air too close. I tried to laugh, to brush off the strange tension that crackled between us. "I suppose we're all searching for something in our own way," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He chuckled, a dark, knowing sound that left me feeling as though I'd revealed too much. "Maybe some of us aren't searching. Maybe we already know what we want." With those words, he rose, leaving me to grapple with the strange pull I felt whenever he was near. The sensation was disorienting, filling me with a mix of intrigue and unease. I had always prided myself on control, on my ability to shape my life exactly as I wanted. But here, in this city of shadows and secrets, I felt as if that control was slipping through my fingers. As the days wore on, I found myself drawn to Philip in ways I couldn't explain, a fascination that felt both dangerous and alluring. It wasn't love, I told myself. It couldn't be. It was only the allure of the forbidden, the thrill of his silent defiance, a reflection of the parts of myself I'd kept buried. But it was in Venice, under the weight of unspoken words and glances that lingered a little too long, that I began to realize I wasn't in control of anything. Not really. I was only beginning to scratch the surface of the secrets between us. And yet, something in me longed to dive deeper, to unravel the threads connecting us, even as I feared where they might lead. In the days that followed, I would come to regret that curiosity. Over the next few days, our time in Venice took on a rhythm, but it was one that didn't quite fit. Mornings began with grand plans. Museums, historical tours, sampling Venetian delicacies at small cafes tucked between narrow streets. But by afternoon, the plan would unravel, with Daniel getting pulled into calls, emails, or some emergency that required his attention. He'd disappear into the study with his laptop, leaving Philip and me to drift through the city on our own. I told myself these moments alone with Philip were innocent, harmless even. But there was an undeniable tension between us, like an electric current humming beneath the surface, growing with each glance, each casual brush of his hand as we passed through the tight alleys. I couldn't understand why this young man, whose life I'd been a part of for years, now seemed to have a hold over me, casting shadows of doubt and temptation that I struggled to ignore. One afternoon, we found ourselves at the Gallery dell'Accademia. The heat had been intense, and the galleries were quiet, nearly deserted. We wandered slowly, our footsteps echoing through the vaulted rooms. Philip stopped in front of a Renaissance painting, his expression unreadable. "There's a darkness to these paintings," he said, his voice low, as though speaking to himself. "The artists poured everything into them, their fears, their desires. Things they could never say out loud." I glanced at him, feeling a shiver at his words. He wasn't looking at the painting but at me, his gaze penetrating, as if he were peeling back the layers I hid behind. His words hung in the air, echoing around us, and I found myself at a loss, unable to meet his gaze for more than a moment. "What about you?" I asked, a bit too quickly, hoping to deflect. "Do you have fears, Philip? Things you keep hidden?" His smile was fleeting, almost bitter. "We all do, don't we?" The answer felt like a deflection, but I didn't push. There was something unsettling about the look in his eyes, a hint of something I couldn't quite name. We continued through the gallery, but his words lingered with me, pulling at the threads of my own carefully guarded secrets. Perhaps he sensed that, sensed my hesitation, my restlessness. After the museum, we walked along the canal, the sun casting long shadows on the stone walls around us. He was quiet, contemplative, and I found myself watching him from the corner of my eye, wondering what he was hiding behind that smirk, that calculated coolness. Then, just as we were about to turn back, I noticed something odd. Philip paused at a small nondescript bridge, glancing around before casually leaning against the railing. From my angle, I could see him reach into his pocket and pull out a slip of paper, glancing at it before tucking it back with an air of secrecy. His eyes darted, scanning the crowd as though he was searching for someone. "Who are you looking for?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, though my heart thudded with a strange thrill. He didn't answer at first, as if weighing whether to share the truth or brush me off. Finally, he shrugged. "An old friend. Someone I knew back when I was covering stories in Europe. He's involved in some things here." His answer was vague, leaving much to interpretation, and it only served to deepen the curiosity that had been growing in me. Was this friend the man I'd seen him meeting in the alley that first night? And if so, what business did Philip have with him? We returned to the villa in near silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. But as we crossed the threshold into the cool, dimly lit interior, I felt a flicker of regret. There was a line here, one I knew better than to cross, and yet the mystery surrounding him, the secrets he held, were drawing me in with a force I hadn't anticipated. That evening, Daniel suggested a group dinner at a nearby trattoria, a charming little spot overlooking the Grand Canal. I spent most of the meal listening to him talk about his latest projects, the new software his team was developing, the potential for future acquisitions. Philip seemed disengaged, offering only the occasional nod or perfunctory comment, his gaze often drifting to the canal outside, where boats drifted by in the fading light. At one point, Daniel excused himself to take a call, leaving us alone at the table. I sipped my wine, feeling the weight of the silence between us, a silence that felt as though it were filled with unspoken words, questions that neither of us dared voice. After a while, Philip turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different? If you hadn't married my father?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I could feel his gaze on me, intense, almost challenging, as though daring me to reveal something, anything. "I don't think about it," I said, though the answer sounded hollow, even to my own ears. "We make choices, and we live with them." He laughed softly, a bitter sound. "That's the difference between us, I suppose. I don't believe in accepting things as they are." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. For the first time, I wondered what had truly brought him to Venice. Was it really just a family vacation? Or did he have other reasons, hidden motives that he was keeping from us? That night, unable to sleep, I wandered through the villa's dimly lit corridors, eventually finding my way to the library. It was a beautiful room, filled with antique books and heavy leather armchairs, a testament to the villa's storied past. As I browsed the shelves, I heard a faint sound from down the hall, a whisper of movement. My heart quickened, and I moved toward the doorway, peeking out just in time to see Philip slipping out of his room, his figure shrouded in shadows as he headed down the staircase. I hesitated, the rational part of me warning that it was none of my business, that whatever he was doing was his own affair. But curiosity and something else, something I couldn't quite name, spurred me to follow. I trailed him through the villa and out onto the canal, careful to keep my distance. We wound through Venice's labyrinthine streets, my footsteps echoing quietly in the empty alleyways. Eventually, he stopped near a bridge, leaning against the railing, waiting. I hung back in the shadows, watching as he scanned the deserted streets, his posture tense, alert. After a few minutes, a figure approached. A man I didn't recognize, tall and dressed in dark clothing. They spoke in hushed tones, their words too quiet for me to make out. But the tension in their exchange was clear, and when Philip handed the man a small package, I felt a chill run through me. What was he involved in? The possibilities raced through my mind, each one darker than the last. I should have turned back, returned to the villa, and pretended I hadn't seen anything. But something compelled me to stay, a morbid curiosity, a desire to understand the secrets he was so carefully guarding. When the exchange was over, Philip watched the man disappear into the night before he began to make his way back toward the villa. I ducked into the shadows, holding my breath as he passed, my heart pounding in my chest. Back in the safety of my room, I lay awake, my mind racing with questions. Who was the man? What was in the package? And why was Philip meeting him in the dead of night, in a foreign city far from the reach of his father's influence? The days that followed only deepened the mystery. Philip continued to disappear at odd hours, always returning with that same air of secrecy, that same smirk that suggested he knew more than he let on. And each time he looked at me, I felt the pull between us grow stronger. A magnetic force that defied reason, that made me question everything I thought I knew. It was then that I realized I was no longer just a bystander in his life, a mere observer to his secrets. I was entangled in them, caught in a web of intrigue and danger that I hadn't anticipated. And as much as I wanted to believe I could walk away, I knew that it was far too late for that. In Venice, secrets weren't meant to stay hidden. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Philip was hiding, it was only the beginning, that there were darker truths lying just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The days after that clandestine night passed in an uneasy blur. By daylight, Venice sparkled, its canals glittering and its buildings golden in the sun's warmth. I tried to lose myself in the city's charm, convincing myself that my curiosity was nothing more than idle distraction. But the memory of Philip in the shadows, exchanging a package with that mysterious figure, clung to me like a shadow, yet I couldn't ask him directly. Daniel was still blissfully unaware, engrossed in business calls, emails, and plans for future projects. He didn't seem to notice the quiet tension between Philip and me, the way his son's gaze lingered a second too long, or the unspoken exchanges that sparked whenever we were alone. Each time Daniel left the room, I felt as though I were stepping into a different world. One where Philip and I shared something dark and unspoken, a secret that was drawing me in despite every warning voice in my head. One afternoon, after Daniel headed off to meet an old colleague in a nearby town, I was left alone in the villa once again. I heard movement down the hall and found Philip in the study, sorting through papers and documents in an oddly purposeful way. His expression was tense, as though he were looking for something specific. "What are you doing?" I asked, feigning casualness, though my heart raced at the thought of uncovering whatever secret he might be hiding. He looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, followed by that familiar, guarded smirk. "Just some research," he replied smoothly, his tone betraying nothing. "I'm working on an article, trying to piece some things together." I nodded, though my instincts told me he wasn't being entirely honest. Something about the way he moved, the tension in his shoulders, hinted at something deeper, something that had nothing to do with journalism. "Does this research have anything to do with the man I saw you with last night?" I asked, unable to hold back. The words left my mouth before I had time to reconsider, and I felt my pulse quicken at the realization that I'd confronted him so directly. Philip's expression didn't waver, but I saw a brief flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or surprise. "You were following me?" "I happened to see you," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "I was curious. You don't strike me as the type to take midnight strolls with strangers." For a moment he held my gaze, an intensity sparking in his eyes that sent a thrill through me, a thrill that felt dangerously close to fear. "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think, Elaine." I took a steadying breath, refusing to back down. "Perhaps not. But you're my stepson, Philip. If you're involved in something dangerous, I think I have a right to know." He laughed softly, the sound dark and cynical. "Dangerous? I wouldn't say that. But let's just say, I have my reasons for being here. Reasons that have nothing to do with bonding with my father." He turned away, as if dismissing the conversation, and I watched him with a mixture of frustration and intrigue. I could feel myself being drawn in, the mystery surrounding him deepening with every evasive answer, every deflection. It was as though he were daring me to pursue the truth, to dig deeper. And despite every logical warning in my head, I found myself wanting to do exactly that. That evening, after Philip had left the villa again, I found myself pacing the hallway outside his room, torn between the desire to know the truth and the fear of what I might uncover. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, before finally pushing the door open. His room was neatly organized, almost too much so. There were no personal items on display, no signs of the man I thought I'd known. But on the desk, I noticed a stack of papers. The top one marked with my husband's name. My heart raced as I scanned the page. It was a legal document, A trust agreement with Daniel's name listed as the primary beneficiary. I didn't know the specifics, but one thing was clear. Whatever Philip was doing here had something to do with his father's finances. I heard footsteps in the hallway, and my pulse quickened. Quickly, I slipped the papers back in place and moved to the window, pretending to admire the view as Philip entered. He paused, looking at me with an unreadable expression. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his tone cool, though I sensed a note of suspicion. "I was just admiring the view," I replied lightly, trying to mask the tension in my voice. "Venice is beautiful at night." He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made me feel as though he could see right through me. "Beautiful, but deceptive. Venice is full of shadows, secrets hiding just beneath the surface." I held his gaze, feeling a strange thrill at his words, a thrill that was both exhilarating and unnerving. "Is that why you're here, Philip? To uncover those secrets?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm just here to find out the truth." The words hung between us, heavy with implication, and I felt a pang of unease. I realized then that Philip wasn't just searching for something hidden in Venice. He was searching for something about his father, something that he believed had been kept from him. And somehow, I had become entangled in that search, a player in a game I didn't fully understand. The next day, Daniel announced that he had an urgent call with his board of directors and would need to spend the afternoon at the villa, leaving Philip and me to explore the city on our own. He handed me a credit card with a wink, encouraging us to enjoy ourselves, and disappeared into his study, already engrossed in his work. Philip suggested we take a vaporetto ride along the Grand Canal, and despite the knot of tension in my chest, I agreed. The afternoon was warm, the sunlight casting a golden glow over the water as we drifted past palaces and churches, their reflections shimmering in the canal. As we reached a quieter part of the city, Philip motioned for me to follow him off the boat and down a narrow alleyway that led to a small, secluded bridge. I hesitated, sensing that we were venturing into territory that felt dangerous, both physically and emotionally. But the curiosity burning inside me was stronger than the fear, and I followed him. He leaned against the bridge railing, gazing out over the water with a distant look in his eyes. "Do you ever wonder if there are things you don't know about Daniel?" he asked suddenly, his voice low, almost a whisper. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "I mean, have you ever felt like he was hiding something from you? Something important?" I hesitated, a flicker of doubt creeping into my mind. Daniel was distant, yes, and he often kept his work life separate from our marriage. But secrets? I hadn't considered it before. And yet, now that Philip mentioned it, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to my husband than I knew. "What are you getting at, Philip?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed, glancing away. "Nothing. Just thinking out loud, I suppose." But I knew he wasn't just thinking out loud. There was something he wasn't telling me, something that weighed on him heavily, and I felt a surge of frustration at his evasiveness. "You can trust me, you know?" I said softly, surprising myself with the intensity of my own words. "If there's something you're involved in, something that concerns Daniel, I want to understand." For a moment, he looked at me with a strange, almost vulnerable expression, as though he were torn between the desire to confide in me and the instinct to keep his secrets close. But then he smiled, a guarded, cynical smile that made my heart ache with disappointment. "Trust is a dangerous thing," he said, his tone tinged with bitterness, "and in my experience, it's rarely worth the risk." He straightened, turning to walk back toward the main canal, and I watched him go, feeling a mixture of frustration and intrigue. Philip was a puzzle, one I was desperate to solve, even as I sensed the danger in becoming too entangled in his secrets. That evening, I couldn't shake the sense that I was missing something important, something hidden just out of reach. I found myself returning to Philip's room while he was out, driven by a need to understand whatever game he was playing. This time I didn't hold back, searching through his belongings with a determination that bordered on desperation. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a folder filled with documents, receipts, and photos. My hands trembled as I sifted through them, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that was far more complex than I'd anticipated. There were bank statements, transactions made to offshore accounts, and legal papers. Documents that suggested Philip had been investigating his father's finances for months, if not years. But it was the photographs that stopped me cold. They were photos of Daniel, taken from a distance, as though he were being followed. And then, at the very bottom of the stack, was a photo of me, taken in the villa, unaware that I was being watched. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the image, realizing with dawning horror that Philip had been watching us, observing us, perhaps even plotting something I couldn't begin to understand. Footsteps echoed down the hall, and I hurriedly shoved the documents back into the drawer, my heart racing as I returned to my room, trying to compose myself. But the sense of dread lingered, growing with each passing moment. I'd thought I was uncovering Philip's secrets, but now I realized that he was uncovering ours, secrets that I hadn't even known existed, secrets that could destroy us all. And as much as I wanted to walk away, to forget the things I'd seen, I knew that it was far too late for that. The villa felt colder that evening, shadows stretching long across the walls as I sat alone, the documents I'd found still fresh in my mind. Each photograph, each document, pointed to something I could no longer ignore. Philip was conducting his own investigation, a meticulous one that involved Daniel, and somehow me. My hands still shook as I remembered the photograph of myself, taken with the same cold detachment that marked Philip's demeanor. He'd been watching us, watching me. But why? And for how long? When Philip finally returned, I was waiting for him in the dimly lit library, the place where our paths so often crossed, the quiet room where I always felt his unspoken words hover around us, thickening the air. He paused when he saw me, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he masked it with that familiar, infuriating smirk. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his tone casual, almost amused. "No," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I thought we might talk." He regarded me with an unreadable expression, then stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. There was a dangerous calm in his demeanor, a quiet intensity that made my heart race despite myself. He took a seat across from me, folding his hands neatly as though preparing for a business meeting. "What would you like to discuss, Elaine?" he asked, his gaze unwavering, challenging. For a moment I was at a loss for words. How did one accuse someone of spying on their own family, of plotting something that defied understanding? But I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my emotions in check. I couldn't afford to let him see the fear in my eyes. "I found something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "In your room. Documents, photographs, evidence that you've been watching Daniel and me, and I want to know why." Philip's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps amusement or satisfaction. "You've been searching through my things?" he asked, his tone casual, almost teasing. "Yes," I replied, refusing to back down. "I had to. You've been hiding things, keeping secrets that involve my husband, and I deserve to know what they are." He leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I'm impressed, Elaine. I didn't think you had it in you to pry. You've always seemed so careful, so content with your role, but here you are, breaking into my room, demanding answers." "Stop it, Philip," I said sharply, feeling my anger rise. "Just tell me the truth. What are you planning? And what does it have to do with Daniel?" He regarded me for a moment, then let out a soft sigh, as though he were finally dropping a facade he'd worn for too long. "Fine," he said, his voice taking on a cold, hard edge. You want the truth? Daniel isn't the man you think he is. He's built his entire empire on lies, on deceit, and I intend to bring it all down. The words hung in the air, stark and unyielding. I stared at him, stunned, trying to process the enormity of what he'd just said. What are you talking about? Your husband, he continued, his tone mocking, has spent years building his fortune through underhanded deals, through partnerships with people who operate in the shadows. Offshore accounts, hidden transactions, bribery. It's all there if you know where to look. He's made millions exploiting loopholes, using people, stepping on those who trusted him. I shook my head, unwilling to believe it. That's ridiculous. Daniel may be distant, but he's not a criminal. Oh, he's careful, I'll give him that, Philip said, his eyes narrowing. He's built his life so perfectly that you'd never suspect a thing. But I have proof. Every shady deal, every under-the-table payment. It's all there. He paused, watching me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I realized that this wasn't just a family feud. Philip wasn't here to simply confront his father. He was here to destroy him. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why would you want to do this? He's your father. Is he? Philip's voice was cold, unfeeling. He left my mother when I was a child, left us to fend for ourselves while he built his empire. He ignored us, pretended we didn't exist. He cared more about his reputation than he ever cared about me. And now, I have the chance to make him pay for everything he's done. I stared at him, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions, anger, fear, and strangely, a flicker of understanding. I knew what it was like to live with someone who kept secrets, who withheld affection in favor of success and power. But this was something else, something darker. And what about me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Where do I fit into this? He leaned closer, his gaze intense. You're a pawn, Elaine, an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire, but if you play your part right, you might come out of this unscathed. His words hit me like a slap, and I felt a surge of indignation. A pawn? You think you can just use me in your twisted game? Philip shrugged, unbothered. Everyone is a pawn in someone's game. You can either play along or get out of the way. The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of his words settling over me like a shroud. I realized then that I was in far deeper than I'd thought, that I'd allowed myself to be drawn into a game I didn't fully understand. And yet, despite the danger, despite the growing sense of dread, I felt a strange exhilaration. This was a part of my life I'd never dared explore, a part of me that yearned for something darker, something more than the carefully constructed image I'd spent years maintaining. But this wasn't just a thrill, it was a risk. And as much as I wanted to confront Daniel, to demand answers, I knew that doing so would only put me in greater danger. Over the next few days, I tried to act as though everything were normal, though every moment with Daniel felt tinged with suspicion. His easy smile, his absent-minded kisses, the way he seemed so thoroughly engrossed in his work, it all felt like a mask, one that I was now desperate to tear away. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, I gathered the courage to ask him a question that had been haunting me. Daniel, have you ever done something you regret in business? He looked at me, surprised, then laughed softly. Regret? No, I've been lucky in my career. I've made some difficult decisions, of course, but nothing I would change. Are you sure? I pressed, trying to keep my voice casual, though my heart raced. No partnerships you wish you hadn't entered into? He paused, a flicker of something, annoyance maybe, crossing his face. Elaine, what's this about? I thought we were on vacation. Are you really interested in my work now? I forced a smile, but inside, my suspicions only grew. He was deflecting, avoiding the question with practiced ease. And I realized with a sinking feeling that Philip's accusations might be true. That night, as I lay awake beside Daniel, I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd ended up here, trapped between two men who seemed to wield secrets like weapons. I thought of Philip, of the cold determination in his eyes, of the way he seemed to revel in the knowledge he held. I thought of Daniel, of the life he'd built on foundations I was no longer sure I understood. And I realized that I couldn't continue living in the shadows of their lies. If I was to understand the truth, I would need to take matters into my own hands. The next day, I asked Daniel if we could explore the city together, hoping for a moment alone to confront him about the things I'd discovered. We wandered through Venice, drifting through the crowded streets and narrow alleys, until we found a quiet corner near the edge of the canal. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Daniel, I need to ask you something serious." He looked at me, his expression softening. "What is it?" "Are you hiding something from me?" I asked, forcing the words out. "Something that could ruin us?" His face tightened, and I saw a flicker of anger in his eyes. "Elaine, what are you talking about?" "Philip," I said, the name leaving my lips before I could stop it. "He's been watching you, investigating your business dealings. He claims you've been involved in illegal transactions, that your empire is built on lies." Daniel's expression turned cold, and for a moment, I saw a side of him I'd never glimpsed before. "Philip has always had a grudge against me," he said, his voice low, controlled. "He's jealous, bitter, he's trying to tear us apart to ruin everything I've worked for, and you're letting him." I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed on. "But is it true, Daniel? Are you hiding something?" His gaze hardened, and I felt a chill run through me. "Some things are better left buried, Elaine. Some truths do more harm than good." The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I would never get a straight answer from him. He was a man who thrived on secrets, who wore deception like a second skin. And I knew, in that moment, that I was truly alone. That evening, I confronted Philip once again, my heart pounding as I found him by the edge of the canal, gazing out over the water. "You were right," I said, my voice trembling. "He's hiding something, something dark." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "And now you see, Elaine. Now you understand why I'm doing this." I took a deep breath, my mind racing. "But I can't be a part of this, Philip. Whatever revenge you're planning, whatever game you're playing, I can't do it." He smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "It's too late, Elaine. You're already part of it. You've been part of it from the beginning." I felt a surge of panic, realizing that there was no way out. I was trapped, caught between two men who saw me as nothing more than a pawn, a piece in a game I didn't understand. And as I looked out over the darkened canal, I realized that my life, my choices, had slipped beyond my control. There were forces at play here, forces far darker than I could have imagined. And all I could do was wait, helpless, as the shadows closed in around me. It all started so innocently. A playful moment in the kitchen that changed everything. The barbecue was supposed to be a low-key way to bring friends and neighbors together, a casual break from the monotony of suburban life. I'd planned the entire event myself, down to the perfectly grilled steaks and a playlist that could please everyone from kids to retirees. My husband, Liam, was supposed to co-host, but as usual, work pulled him away. By the time the guests started arriving, he was already glued to his laptop in the corner of the living room, apologizing every so often as he typed furiously. So there I was, juggling conversation, drinks, and the grill, while trying to keep everyone entertained. It wasn't until the evening started winding down that I even noticed Blake standing off to the side, beer in hand, his effortless smile lighting up the patio. Blake was a recent addition to the neighborhood, a 23-year-old fitness trainer who moved in across the street a few months ago. I didn't know much about him beyond the occasional wave or polite small talk. He seemed friendly enough, but he was younger than most of the people on our block. The kind of guy who got attention without trying, a head-turner in the way that made some of the older wives blush and laugh nervously during morning jogs. At one point, I found myself in the kitchen, stacking empty plates and wiping down the counter. Blake walked in, holding a nearly empty beer bottle. "Need help?" he asked, his voice casual but warm. I laughed and waved him off. "You've done enough damage out there, charming half the neighborhood women," I teased, not really expecting him to respond. To my surprise, he leaned against the counter and grinned. What can I say? It's the smile. I rolled my eyes but couldn't help laughing. "All right, Mr. Modesty, hand me those glasses." He passed them over, and as I reached to stack them on a high shelf, I felt him watching me. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was noticeable. The moment lingered just long enough for me to feel the need to break it. "Oh, by the way," I said, turning toward him, "you've got barbecue sauce right there." I gestured toward the corner of his shirt. "Do I?" He looked down, brushing at the spot. When it didn't come off, I acted on impulse. "Here, let me." I tugged at the hem of his shirt, lifting it just enough to check. It wasn't intentional, just a silly, thoughtless gesture to help. But the fabric came up farther than I meant, revealing a glimpse of his stomach. I froze. My hand hovered for a second too long, my eyes catching the sharp ridges of his abs before I quickly dropped the shirt back down. "There," I mumbled, stepping back as heat crept up my neck. Blake didn't move. His grin shifted, his expression softer now, more curious than teasing. For a split second, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, something I hadn't felt in a long time. That was the moment. The moment everything shifted, even if I didn't realize it yet. The moment that started what I can only describe as the most exhilarating, terrifying chapter of my life. The next morning, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. It wasn't just the sight of Blake's abs or how effortless it was for him to disarm me. It was the shift I felt in myself. For the first time in years, I was aware of how someone else saw me, how my presence affected them. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. Of course, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was a fleeting moment, an overreaction on my part. Liam and I had been married for 8 years, and though our relationship had settled into something predictable, even stagnant, I always believed we were solid. But then there I was, standing in the middle of the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee, wondering what Blake had thought when I touched his shirt. I didn't have to wonder for long. A week later, I was at the gym, half-heartedly trudging through my usual treadmill routine. It wasn't a glamorous gym, more like one of those small local spots where people came to feel less guilty about skipping dessert. I went out of obligation, more to check it off my list than to achieve any real fitness goals. That's when I saw him. Blake. He was on the far side of the gym, standing in front of a mirror with a set of weights. His back was to me, broad and perfectly sculpted, his shirt clinging to his shoulders. He was in his element, every movement controlled and deliberate, sweat glistening on his skin. I tried not to stare. I really did. But there was something magnetic about him, something that made it impossible not to watch. I thought I'd gotten away with it until he caught my reflection in the mirror. He grinned, set the weights down, and turned around. "Danica?" He sounded surprised, like he hadn't expected to see me there. I forced a smile, suddenly hyper-aware of my ponytail and the unflattering tank top I'd thrown on that morning. "Hey, Blake. Didn't know you came here." "Just started," he said, wiping his face with a towel. "You come here often?" I shrugged. "Sometimes, when I'm feeling ambitious." He laughed, and before I knew it, he was walking toward me. "You're doing great," he said, glancing at my treadmill. "Mind if I show you a couple of things? Maybe shake up your routine?" I hesitated, but there was something so casual, so unassuming about the way he asked. "Sure," I said, stepping off the treadmill. Over the next 20 minutes, Blake showed me a series of exercises, guiding me through each one with the ease of a professional. At one point, he placed his hands lightly on my waist to adjust my form, and I felt a jolt of awareness shoot through me. His touch was firm but gentle, and it lingered just a second too long. "See? Perfect," he said, his voice low and close. I couldn't meet his eyes. "Thanks," I mumbled, stepping away under the guise of grabbing a towel. By the time we finished, I was flushed, and not just from the workout. Blake walked me to the door, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. "Coffee?" he asked casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I hesitated. It wasn't a big deal. Coffee was harmless. But there was a part of me that felt like accepting would mean crossing some invisible line, even if I couldn't quite explain why. Sure, I heard myself say. We ended up at a little cafe a few blocks from the gym. It was quiet, tucked away from the main road, the kind of place I might have picked if I were trying to avoid running into anyone I knew. The conversation started light, fitness, work, random observations about the neighborhood. But somewhere between his second coffee and my half-eaten muffin, it shifted. "You're different than I expected," he said, his eyes steady on mine. I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "I don't know," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You just seem confident, like you don't care what people think." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I wouldn't go that far." "No, really," he said. "Most people are so busy trying to fit into these little boxes, you know? You're not like that." The compliment caught me off guard. Liam rarely said things like that anymore, if he ever did. For a moment, I let myself savor it, let myself imagine what it might be like to hear those words more often. The rain started just as I was finishing up some work at home a few days later. Liam was out of town for a conference, and the house felt unusually quiet. I was scrolling mindlessly through my phone when a text popped up. "Blake, I think I left my sunglasses at your place. Mind if I swing by and grab them?" My stomach flipped. I'd barely spoken to him since our coffee outing, convincing myself it was better to keep some distance. But now, the idea of seeing him again sent a nervous thrill through me. "Me? Sure. Come by anytime." 20 minutes later, Blake was standing at my front door, his hair damp from the rain. He had that same easy smile, the one that could disarm anyone, and I felt my resolve weakening. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. I poured us each a drink, something casual to take the edge off the awkwardness I was trying so hard not to feel. We sat on the couch, talking about nothing in particular. At some point, he leaned forward to grab his drink, and I noticed a faint smudge of mud on his shirt. Without thinking, I reached over and tugged at the fabric. "You've got..." The words died in my throat as the shirt lifted, just like it had that night in the kitchen. This time, though, neither of us moved away. His eyes found mine, and in that moment, the air between us felt electric, charged with something I couldn't name but didn't want to resist. "Danica," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have stopped. I should have said something, done something to put distance between us. But instead, I let the moment pull me in, closer and closer, until there was nothing left between us. Blake's lips were softer than I expected, but his kiss wasn't tentative. It was deliberate, like he'd been waiting for this moment and knew exactly what to do with it. My mind screamed at me to stop, to pull back and pretend this hadn't just happened, but my body betrayed me. I leaned in closer, my fingers gripping the front of his shirt, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath the fabric. For a second, nothing else existed. The rain outside, the quiet house, my husband, they all blurred into the background. All I could focus on was Blake, his hands sliding to my waist, pulling me closer, grounding me in the moment, while simultaneously making me feel like I was floating. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing heavily, I didn't say anything. What could I possibly say? Sorry? I didn't mean to? That would have been a lie, and we both knew it. Blake looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, part surprise, part satisfaction, and maybe a hint of restraint. "I should go," he said finally, his voice low and rough. I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. "Yeah, okay." But neither of us moved. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything unspoken, until Blake stood and grabbed his jacket. He hesitated by the door, his hand on the doorknob, then turned back to me. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said quietly. And then he was gone. The hours that followed felt like a dream. No, more like a nightmare. Guilt washed over me in waves, and yet, beneath it, there was something else. Something I didn't want to name, because acknowledging it would mean admitting the truth. I wanted him. Not just the fleeting thrill of the kiss, but all of him. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. It couldn't. I was a married woman, and Liam didn't deserve this. But the problem with moments like that kiss is that they don't just disappear. They linger, leaving traces of themselves in everything you do. The next few days were agonizing. Blake didn't text, didn't call, didn't give me any reason to believe he even thought about what had happened between us. And yet I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time my phone buzzed, my pulse spiked, only to plummet when it wasn't him. When Liam came home from his trip, I tried to throw myself into being the perfect wife. I cooked his favorite meal, listened to him complain about his meetings, even initiated sex for the first time in weeks. But as we lay in bed that night, his hand lazily tracing patterns on my hip, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting. I pictured Blake's hands instead, his mouth, his body pressed against mine. And just like that, the guilt returned, sharp and suffocating. The next time I saw Blake, it wasn't planned. I was at the grocery store, standing in the produce aisle, trying to decide between organic or regular spinach, because apparently, even mundane decisions felt monumental when you were trying to distract yourself from the fact that you'd kissed someone who wasn't your husband. Danica. His voice sent a shiver down my spine, and when I turned to face him, he was standing there, casually holding a basket filled with protein bars and bananas. He smiled, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "Hey," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, his tone light, like we were just two neighbors bumping into each other, like nothing had happened. "Yeah, just grabbing a few things." I gestured to my half-empty cart, suddenly hyper-aware of how close he was standing. There was a pause, the kind that felt too long and not long enough all at once. And then he stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I can't stop thinking about you." My stomach flipped, a mix of excitement and dread. "Blake." "I know," he interrupted, his eyes searching mine. "I know it's complicated, but that doesn't change how I feel." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that it was just a kiss, a mistake, something we could both move past. But I couldn't, because I knew he wasn't wrong. It didn't take long for us to cross the line again. It started with a text late one night. Liam was asleep next to me, his soft snoring filling the room when my phone lit up. "Blake, can I see you?" I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, my heart racing as I debated whether to respond. I knew what it meant, what would happen if I said yes. But instead of deleting the message, instead of putting my phone down and turning over to go back to sleep, I typed 2 words. "Me. Come over." The moments between sending the text and hearing the quiet knock at my front door felt endless. When I opened it, Blake was standing there, his expression unreadable but his eyes blazing with intensity. Neither of us said a word as he stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. This time, there was no hesitation. His hands found my waist, mine tangled in his hair, and within seconds we were on the couch. Everything about him was intoxicating. The weight of his body on mine, the way his lips explored my neck, the quiet groan he made when I pulled him closer. It was reckless, messy, and completely consuming. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. Our meetings became more frequent after that, each one more daring than the last. We met at his apartment, in his car, once even in a secluded spot at the park. Each time I told myself it would be the last, and each time I found myself craving more. Blake made me feel things I hadn't felt in years: desirable, adventurous, wanted. With him, I wasn't just Liam's wife or the woman who planned neighborhood barbecues. I was Danica. Just Danica. But with every stolen moment, the weight of what I was doing grew heavier. I found myself jumping at every text notification, every unexpected knock at the door, terrified that someone would find out. That Liam would find out. And then, one night, he almost did. Liam came home early from a work dinner, catching me off guard as I sat in the living room, scrolling through my phone while Blake's name lit up the screen. I fumbled to turn it off, my heart pounding as Liam walked in, loosening his tie. "Hey," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. "What are you up to?" "Nothing," I said too quickly, forcing a smile. "Just catching up on emails." He nodded, thankfully too tired to notice how flustered I was. But as I watched him head to the kitchen, guilt crashed over me like a tidal wave. I had no idea how much longer I could keep this up. Blake became a dangerous addiction, and I couldn't stop myself. The excitement, the rush of secrecy, and the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world, it was intoxicating. But the closer we got, the more I realized that he wasn't just some casual fling to me, and that terrified me. This wasn't just physical anymore. Emotions were creeping in, messy and uncontrollable. I started to notice subtle changes in Blake. He wasn't content with stolen moments anymore. He began asking questions about Liam. Not just casual questions, but pointed ones. "Do you still love him?" he asked one night as we lay tangled in the sheets at his apartment. I hesitated, and he caught it. That's your answer, he said quietly, rolling onto his back. I sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around me. It's not that simple, Blake. I've been with him for 8 years. We have a life together. A life you're not happy in, he shot back, his voice calm but laced with frustration. He wasn't wrong, but admitting that felt like crossing a line I wasn't ready for. What we're doing, it's not about him, I said, trying to steady my voice. It's about us. Is it? He asked, sitting up to face me. Because I don't think I can keep doing this if I'm just your escape. I want more, Danica. I want you. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I hadn't expected this. I thought we both knew what this was. Temporary, fleeting, something that would eventually burn itself out. But now I could see that wasn't what he wanted. And maybe deep down, it wasn't what I wanted either. I left his apartment that night with my mind spinning. I told him I needed time to think. But the truth was, I didn't know what to think. My life felt like it was splitting in two, and I wasn't sure which version of myself I wanted to keep. The breaking point came a few days later. It was late afternoon, and I was home alone, folding laundry in the bedroom. My phone buzzed on the nightstand and I glanced over to see Blake's name. But this time, it wasn't a text. It was a video. My stomach dropped as I opened it. The screen filled with a scene I recognized immediately. Us, tangled together on his couch, the night he came over in the rain. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I realized what I was looking at. He'd recorded us. The video ended and a second text followed. Blake. Don't worry, it's just for me. No one else will ever see it. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing. How long had he been doing this? How many times had he recorded us without me knowing? My hands were shaking as I called him. He answered on the first ring. Hey, he said, his tone casual, like nothing was wrong. What the hell is this, Blake? I snapped, barely able to keep my voice steady. He recorded us? Without asking me? There was a pause, and then he sighed. It's not what you think, Danica. I wasn't trying to. I just wanted something to remember you by. Something to hold on to. That's not okay, I said, my voice rising. You had no right to do that. Calm down, he said, his tone shifting, becoming harder. It's not like I'm showing it to anyone. It's just for me. You know I'd never hurt you. But his words didn't reassure me. In fact, they made my skin crawl. For the first time since this started, I felt genuinely afraid of him. I want it deleted, I said firmly. Every video, every picture, everything. I mean it, Blake. He didn't respond right away, and the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally he said, Okay, I'll delete them. You have my word. But I didn't believe him. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that Blake was watching me, waiting for something. He started texting more, asking to see me, apologizing for the videos, but insisting that he couldn't lose me. His messages ranged from heartfelt pleas to borderline threats, and I felt like I was walking a tightrope, trying to keep him calm while figuring out what to do. Then, one evening, Liam came home earlier than expected. I was in the kitchen, trying to act normal, when he walked in holding the mail. Hey, he said, flipping through the envelopes. There's something weird in here for you. He handed me a small package, unmarked and wrapped in plain brown paper. My heart sank as I took it, already knowing who it was from. Inside was a USB drive and a note. Blake's handwriting was unmistakable. You know how to reach me. Don't make me wait. I froze, my hands trembling as I quickly shoved the package into the nearest drawer. Liam gave me a curious look but didn't press. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Just some work stuff. But it wasn't okay. None of it was. That night, after Liam went to bed, I plugged the USB into my laptop. It was worse than I thought. The drive wasn't just a collection of videos, it was a weapon. Blake had saved everything. Texts, photos, and clips from our encounters. He had the power to destroy my marriage, my reputation, my entire life. I knew then that I had to end it. Not just with Blake, but all of it. The affair, the lies, the double life I'd created. I couldn't keep doing this. The next day I texted Blake and told him we needed to meet. He suggested his apartment, but I insisted on a neutral place, somewhere public. We ended up at a quiet park, the same one where we'd met in secret weeks earlier. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting on a bench with his hands in his pockets. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment, I saw the Blake I'd first been drawn to, the charming, carefree guy who made me feel alive. But that version of him was gone. "We can't keep doing this," I said, sitting down beside him but keeping my distance. His jaw tightened. "So that's it? You're just gonna walk away?" "I don't have a choice," I said, my voice breaking. "This isn't sustainable, Blake. It never was." He didn't respond right away, and the silence stretched between us. Finally, he pulled out his phone and handed it to me. "It's all there," he said. "Everything I've got. Go ahead. Delete it." I hesitated, searching his face for any sign of deception. But he looked sincere, defeated even. Slowly, I took the phone and began deleting the files, one by one. When I was done, I handed it back to him. "This has to be the end," I said quietly. He nodded, but there was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't letting go. I walked away from that park feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. I'd taken back control, but at what cost? As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Blake. "This isn't over.